in-depth tricks if you're interpreting the text. And they're just basic things that I've noticed people often do wrong. One of them is, you have something prepared on paper, though in some recitation competitions, and that's also a good exercise, you have to memorize the whole text, like 7 minutes of speech. But if you're doing theater, like an hour or half an hour worth of dialogue, you have to memorize. And that's a good exercise, because that's not something that you will be able to do immediately, but if you train it, you will get better at it. But you never should sound like you're reading it from a paper. If you sound like you're reading it, then you're disengaged from the audience completely, and they don't care at all about what you're saying. It happens sometimes if you look on YouTube. There are videos, and there are videos with just voiceover with some images, and you can tell, in most cases, you can tell if the person who's doing the video is just, sitting somewhere reading it from a paper or a teleprompter, or if they're actually saying it, or interpreting the text. They're being, talking as if they were talking to a person. It's like if you want to go work at a radio station, if you're trying to record, a sample and prove that you can be a person on the radio, you must not talk like you're a person in a small room where there's no people. You must talk, imagine in your head that you're speaking to large crowds on a stage. And if you speak in that way, it's right volume and with all the confidence and all the emotion, then it works. But if you speak like you're just a single person in the room reading something from paper, it doesn't. Then of course, it's also a very basic error that many people do. Never say all of the things that you say in the same way. If I was talking like that the whole time and I never changed how I talk and I was just keep talking like that forever, then you will be asleep in seconds. And it doesn't have to be so obvious. It doesn't have to be a complete monotony. It could be anything. It could be I could just talk angrily all the time and never change how I talk, and I could be talking like this forever and it would still be bad because it's always the same. There needs to be a dynamism. It needs to be dynamic. The way you speak needs to change. There have to be changes because those will wake people up and maintain their attention. In that sense, it's also important to work with two things: a pause and emphasis. If you never emphasize anything, it's bad. If you always emphasize everything, it's also bad. If the pause is at a place where it makes no sense, it's bad. But if you use pauses where there needs to be pause, and if you emphasize things that need to be emphasized, which I have demonstrated, then it also helps your speech very much. So, then the last bit would be, if you speak, especially in English language. English language is a kind of language. English language is a kind of language where verse is very important. If you speak English, it's generally very easy to tell that you're not a native speaker if you cannot master speaking in verse. If you speak English, it should flow. It should flow like, if you hear just the emphasis in the verse, it should be just flowing like da 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 da. There needs to be some sort of rhythm to it if you speak it. And for that reason, it's very good if you listen to rappers even, because they work with that to the highest extent. But everyone in English language speaks, if they speak well, they use some sort of verse. There are different kinds of verse, and there doesn't have to be a rhyme. So it's important not to confuse the two. Verse is not necessarily a rhyme. Can any one of you explain to me the difference between a verse and rhyme? What is rhyme?
The end of the words from same or from or and more.
Yes, exactly. And soon you will see how good of an example that is, because I have something prepared where that is exactly the kind of rhyme that's constantly there. Yes, that is a rhyme, but what's a verse?
It's from the word I don't know the word. More verses make it's from something like a song. I don't know the word.
It's a bit more of a technical thing to explain, but what's important about it is that in words you have some syllables have emphasis and some don't. So there could be an emphasis, and then twice not, and then again yes, and then twice not. That's one kind of verse. And there are many different kinds of verse, and the emphasis is rhythmically repeating at the same point of the words. So it's about placing or choosing the right words so that it can be said in a way that's rhythmical. And it could be any kind of rhythm, it could change all the time, but it needs to be some kind of rhythm. I've chosen a text you might know. It's a little poem called The Raven. Who of you knows The Raven from Edgar Allan Poe? Please raise your hand. Oh, this is going to be a treat. The Raven is one of the most famous poems in the history of poetry, and it's written by an American author. Do you at least know Edgar Allan Poe? What kind of art did Edgar Allan Poe do? I mean, in terms of like art school.
Science fiction.
Science fiction, yes, too. Yes.
Dark horror.
Yes, little horror. Yes.
Classics.
Criminal stories, yes, crime dramas.
Philosophical a bit.
Also, it's a lot of stuff, and he wrote it sometimes as poetry, sometimes as prose. But what's important that he had this sense of romanticism. Do you know romanticism as a historical period of art? What does it mean to be romantic? Beautiful.
From where starts romantic?
Well, it's
About nature.
it could be, yes, because that's the thing. Romantic, in this sense, is not just love stories, though the love definitely will be in them. But you know, even a Frankenstein is a romantic story in the sense. Yes?
It's based on emotions, not love brains.
Yes, yes, exactly. The emotions. And that's why I chose specifically this poem. Because there's a lot of emotion in it. And if you're interpreting a text and you want to make anything that you say interesting, then emotion is something that you need to be able to act out. Something that you need to be able to convey. And do you know what is the word? Those of you who know Raven, the poem, do you know what is the word that is repeating there very often? Nevermore, exactly. Which is why the rhyme that you've chosen is perfect. Nevermore is appearing there at least a dozen times in the poem, or something to that effect. That's either evermore or ending as more. And if you recite the poem at a competition and you want to, stand out and do it well, do you think it would work if you always said nevermore in exactly the same way?
No.
It would get boring really fast. So, I will try first with you a little exercise. It's really super, super easy. Or, well, depends on how well you can do it, but it's the concept, it's easy. I will always choose some of you, there could be volunteers, and you will say the word nevermore, but I will give you an emotion that you have to say it in. Because you can say the word nevermore in any emotion. I can even give you a bit of a context. What is the situation, why you're saying nevermore? So, is there a volunteer? No, so there will be a random selection, and I'm randomly choosing you. Okay, so the situation is, let's start upbeat. This is a situation that you found out that you will never ever in your life again be forced to do a test at school. So you will say nevermore joyously.
Nevermore!
Yes, great. And I think you should always encourage. Now, something very different. So for instance, you, since you know a lot about poetry, just please everybody pay attention, it's important. So, you this situation that you find out that you would never in your life again be able to eat ice cream. So you say very angrily.
Nevermore!
Great, that was actually then some of the more conventional meanings of this that's used in the poem. It's a situation where you've dated someone and really liked them, but you broke up and it's not going to work out ever again. So you will say it very sadly. So, for instance, you try. Great. I mean, the situation would not be great, but the way how you can emote these things, and that's just a single word. It's one of the main part of the genius of this poem. You can work with so little, and it just works in the heads of the people who are reading it, because they of course imagine all sorts of things. and we could try maybe one more. So something weird. Does anybody have a suggestion on the emotion? Some weird emotion that you would like to hear that's spoken in?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Oh, that's interesting.
Anger.
Anger. We've done anger though. Well, maybe the way you performed it was more of a frustration, but let's do curiosity. I like that. So, is there anyone who'd like to volunteer to say it curiously? Like a question. So maybe I will volunteer you.
Nevermore?
Yes, the very basic level. Just figuring out that something is weirdly never gonna happen again. So that is just but one of the elements that you can do with interpretation of text is just putting the emotion into the words that you write. But of course, there's other things, and I can demonstrate, for instance, the rhyme. Well, I will try to say at least the first, recite the first two short paragraphs of it, so that you get some sense of what kind of poem it is, because there are many people who haven't heard it at all. But then in those first two, I can explain a lot of the things on a demonstrate on an example that I've talked about. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. So, in this text, there's a lot of points which are interesting. For instance, the verse, or the way in which you need to say things so that they work rhythmically. There's a very weird thing. On the beginning of one sentence, the first, the "ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December." There's "ah" added. And it's not really necessary. It could completely be serviceable if you just wrote, "Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December," if you then weren't forced to pronounce December rhythmically wrong. Because you don't say December in English as December. You say it as December. And just for you to be able to say it, you need to put the "ah" at the beginning, so just the emphases work in the sentence. So if you're writing something down, you need to try to read it out loud in your head before you say it, because you need to know how it will be spoken in this way. And that's how verse works, basically. You need to be able to say the sentence that you wrote without you breaking your tongue on it, because you just, the equivalent of you slipping if you walked. Then another thing, emphasis. Sometimes the text do it for you. Here, the word "here" is emphasized. It's a cursive. The nameless here forevermore. Why do you think it's emphasized? That the beautiful Lenore is nameless here forevermore. What is the "here"? Because the text intention is making you think about it. What do you think is the status of Lenore? What's happened to her? Yes, she died. So here, she's nameless. So just by doing that, you're creating the whole, in the imagination of people, a different place where she might be living. And that's just by emphasizing the word. So you need to, if there's a word that needs to be emphasized for the reader or the listener to better understand what you're talking about, then you need to say it in an emphasized manner, because you need to do emphasis at the right place and the right time. And in this text, there are a number of times where that happens. But there's also another thing. There are a few words like suddenly or eagerly. Do you think there's any logical reason why you would ever say suddenly, slowly? Like, "Oh, it happened suddenly." It's completely illogical, because you're then fighting against the meaning of the word. So if there is a word like suddenly, you can only say it for that to make sense. There are a couple of different ways you could do it, but it has to be something like suddenly. and a dramatic pause right after that is like a good place. So if you want, for instance, see that your listeners are sort of kind of falling asleep, then you could pull something like and then suddenly, and they will be like waking up, because that's something that that quite catches the attention. Also the eagerly. If you say eagerly, you probably also have to say it like you actually mean it, like eagerly. It's also not. It doesn't make any sense if you try to say it in the opposite emotion. Please, somebody try. I will volunteer someone again. Try to say eagerly in a way that's completely not eager, which if I volunteer you would probably be perfect. So let's try, for instance, you. Try to say eagerly like you are not eager at all. Eagerly.
Eagerly.
Like
Eagerly.
yes, eagerly. I will do that. Eagerly. Excellent. If you do that, you must be making some sort of super clever point about it, or it doesn't make any sense. Like you're parodying it, or you're being ironic. And a lot of the irony actually lies in your ability to say things in a way that doesn't make sense for people to pick up. So that's something that if you take a text like this, then you can just see all of these things in there. And if you just, by you trying to figure out how to say this text, you're learning these principles. Especially if you then say it to someone and they give you feedback, or at least they give you feedback by what they look like when they're listening to you.